For my literature review project, I chose to explore the question, is occupational therapy effective in treating different kinds of intellectual and developmental disabilities? I chose this question because I'm going to be an occupational therapist one day. And within this past year, I've become specifically interested in the specialization of occupational therapy professionals that work with those who have disabilities. I felt like this realm of research would not only be interesting to me, but also hopefully be helpful to me in my future career working with people that have disabilities. Some background of occupational therapy: it is applicable to a variety of different settings as well as different patient populations. Some patient populations that are usually of interest include those who have injuries, children with developmental delays, and more recently, individuals that have intellectual or developmental disabilities. An occupational therapist's role is to help patients return their level of functioning to their previous level of functioning, or to the highest level of functioning that they can attain. This differs with different populations. With an individual that has sustained an injury, the occupational therapist would be working to return them to their previous level of function. But with a patient that has a developmental delay or a disability, they are working to get that patient to achieve a higher level of functioning than they have ever had before. The results from this study, with the different occupational therapy techniques that were used, demonstrated that there was improvement in the individuals after the occupational therapy sessions in the areas that were being assessed. The different occupational therapy techniques that were used in these studies include hippotherapy, which is occupational therapy that is done while the patient is riding a horse, to job outreach through employment securement, and classroom interventions. Some specific examples in these studies of the results that were attained include the classroom study, where teachers and occupational therapists collaborated to increase the participation levels of the students that had disabilities in the school. They worked together to create curriculum that would enhance participation, and by the end of the study, the classroom participation had increased as a result of the occupational therapy intervention. One of the other studies involved an occupational therapist that was working with individuals that had disabilities to help them get a job whenever they had not been able to have one before because they could not adapt to the job roles. One thing that I found really interesting in that study was that the occupational therapist did a lot of things to accommodate the job role to the individual. And so one of the things was that she provided visual instructions with pictures to the individual rather than written instructions, because he responded better to pictures of what he needed to do in the job. And by the end of that study, both individuals involved held jobs, and they were able to keep those jobs after the study had ended. One of my favorite research articles out of all 5 was titled "Salivary Alpha Amylase as a Marker of Stress Reduction in Individuals with Intellectual Disability and Autism in Response to Occupational Therapy and Music Therapy." In that study, they measured stress levels through the individual's saliva, and occupational therapy and music therapy were implemented to decrease stress, which it did by the end of the study. One thing that I found interesting in that study was located in the background section and the introduction. They were talking about how individuals that have these disabilities often have a lower sense of well-being than typically developing individuals. And with that, they also have higher stress levels. So I thought that was interesting because I had never considered stress or mental dimensions of well-being to be something that occupational therapists could really work on and help patients with. And it opened my mind up to a whole other area of occupational therapy. One job application that I feel like this information can be applied to is an occupational therapist for pediatric patients that have disabilities. The stress level study talked about the mental dimension of well-being through the stress levels. And I feel like whenever you decrease stress levels and increase well-being in the patient, you can then work on fine motor skills and the other things that occupational therapists do. And I hope that this information will be able to help me do that in the future with my own patients in being able to treat the whole person. Thank you, and I hope that you're staying safe.